Can you be receptive to God's grace without participating in an organized religion? Yes, I think you can, but it's a lot harder, right? And I say in the book, one thing the book talks a bit about is the very commonplace idea in American culture, among non-Christians certainly, that you can be spiritual and not religious, or you can just sort of pick something from lots of different religions and make your own personalized religion and get closer to God that way. And I'm not going to say that that's impossible. God works through all kinds of people and ways of being and so on. But what I say in the book is, look, you, meaning you and me and everyone else, are probably not a religious genius, right? Like the odds are that you are not uniquely situated to like pluck a little bit of Hinduism, a little Buddhism, a little Christianity and figure it out. It is much more likely that you, like most people, are going to be better off participating, submitting, joining a tradition larger than yourself, and that is the good side of religion, which again leaves plenty of room for the bad side. And if we get a big religious comeback in America and we have powerful religious institutions again, then I can write a new book saying, okay, here's where those institutions are going wrong. But I think at this moment, in 2025, a little more religion would be good for our country and our culture.
Okay, so then I was intuiting that, but it's good to hear you say it, that you're trying to look at where we are now and what needs to be said, particularly now.
Yes.
And so we're living in a culture that is irreligious or secular, or it's interesting because, since you're a columnist for the Times, I feel, having lived in Manhattan most of my life, there's a smug secularity. In other words, there's an idea that no one does religion anymore. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, has become pretty entrenched. And so it is the more shocking for you to say, no, we should look at this seriously. And so I'm getting the idea that that's your intent.
And I think it's not, I don't think it's a smug moment right now. I think that smugness is there, certainly, and
it's
been there for it's still there. Look, America is a big, complicated country, and if you want to find a smug secular atheist, you can find one. Go on the internet, go into the comment threads. You can find that person. But in terms of like what is the dominant mode in our culture right now, I don't think it's Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens declaring that religion is rubbish and poisons everything. I think it's much more people saying, I'm not religious, I struggle to see how you could believe in God. I'm talking about like more elite culture now, like Manhattan, right? Yeah. Not the country as a whole, but the culture of the mass media and academia. I think there's a lot of people saying, I'm interested in religion, I don't really think I can fully believe in it, but I think it might be good for society. I talk to a lot of people who will say, oh, I have a lot of friends who are, going back to church or going to their synagogue, and they don't really believe, but they feel like they missed religion and they want it back, right? So I think that's more where a lot of people are in 2025. And again, especially younger people, right? Like the cohort that was most influenced by a smug atheism is people my age, like late Generation X and early millennials, people who were there when the internet first hit, and suddenly it was like, you were getting exposed to, critiques of religion that no youth pastor was equipped to deal with, right? Like that was that reality. This is a different reality right now. Gen Z just, again, they haven't had as much experience with the bad side of religion that you described, so they're more open to the good side. I just think it's more unsettled and more open than it was, even when I started at the Times. I've been there, 15 years now.
It is interesting to think generationally, because I grew up in the 70s, because I'm older than you, but you remember it was in the culture, people who were older than I, would be talking about their terrible experiences in the 50s and the 60s, growing up in Catholic school and the nuns, and there was this kind of reaction to a culture that had been monolithically religious, where pretty much everyone went to church someplace. And so there was a reaction to that. And of course, the 60s and the 70s were the sexual revolution, to some extent, a reaction to that world, which had existed for the longest period of time. But as you say, we're really in a new day. And I think the older you get, the more you forget that oh, everybody doesn't think the way I do. They've had,
Right.
recent decades have created different kinds of people.
This is probably the last point at which I will be able to say anything with authority about the younger generation, right? And in 15 or 20 years, I'll just be sort of sputtering and confused. But yes, I think you can see that right now. And it's different. I mean, there are places where I think it's clearer than in America. I think if you look at Western Europe right now, at places where secularization went the furthest, right? Like France and England, right, are much more secular than America ever became. And those are the places that have had actually the clearest rebound, not just a kind of plateau, but an actual rebound, seemingly, of religious commitment and belief. There's data out of the United Kingdom, for instance, that shows that genuinely Generation Z is more religious than Generation X in the UK, which is, I mean, and again, you're starting from a low threshold, right?
Right.
But there's similar data in France. Adult baptisms and conversions are going up. So I do think, first of all, as Christians, we think God is always there, right? And you're never going to achieve total secularization. Right, but what that means is you get pendulum swings.
Yeah.
You get eras where people get tired of sort of the potentially oppressive side of organized religion and experience secularization as a relief. And then you have eras like ours where people look around at a secular landscape and say, well, what is the purpose of life again? Where are we going as human beings? And suddenly religion becomes relevant again.
Part of how I have diagnosed this, I guess, in my lifetime is that I don't know if it was I think it was Peter Berger who said that, we're a nation of Indians ruled by Swedes. In other words, that America largely is very religious, but that the elites are dramatically secular. And I think that has held for, a very long time. And so I think of, obviously, publications like The Times. They assume secularity. They seem to live in a world where there is no other option. And so I feel that most Americans taking in whatever media they're taking in, they don't hear about, I just think of my own experience. When I was 25, I had this dramatic conversion experience, and suddenly I'm inundated with amazing books and speakers, and I thought, where have they existed? I grew up in a world where none of this existed. And I feel that that's part of it. I think that if you're looking for clues in the culture, the elites in the culture tend to be so secular that you would get the impression that nobody's having any religious experiences. And I'm thinking in your book you reference your mother, whom I know, having in the 80s a very dramatic, I don't know what you call it, mystical experience, I guess we would say with the Holy Spirit, but it's so dramatic, it seems impossible to think that she's making it up or whatever. If you've been around that, it's just impossible to dismiss it. I mean, you can make of it what you will, but it's impossible to say that stuff doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, and this is part of why, I mean, I have not had really intense religious and mystical experiences in my own life. I've had some experiences that sort of are on the edges of that category, but nothing that would fit naturally into like William James's varieties of religious experience or something. But I have been around people, including my mother, but other people as well, who have had those experiences. I have watched people have those experiences. And that is in part why the book spends a certain amount of time talking about religious experience as important evidence, important reason to take religion seriously. So it's not just about, the fine-tuning of the physical laws of the cosmos. It's not just about the mystery of consciousness. It's also just the persistent reality that it sure seems like some kind of higher power is knocking on people's doors. And that, to your point about elites, in the book I use the term official knowledge. Right? It's not that the 21st century or the 20th century were actually disenchanted. People use that term a lot, right? That implies that like religious experiences stopped happening. And they did not, right? By some measures, you get Pentecostalism is an entirely 20th century phenomenon. Near-death experiences only become culturally important when we start bringing lots of people back from the brink of death, right? So there's all these ways in which the mystical is still there or reemerges, but you do have this layer of like if you are at Yale Law School, if you are, in academia, if you are editing a Wikipedia entry, right, you're going to have a strong anti-supernaturalist bias. I don't know if that will last forever, though. I think the Berger line totally applies to America in 1975. In 2025, a couple of things have changed. One is that working class America has become less religious. People are still pretty likely to say they believe in God, but like church going has fallen way off in blue collar, Rust Belt America, right? And then there's actually more church going among college educated Americans. And there's a lot of places where religion is kind of an indicator of, having things together, like people who sort of have it together and have kids and so on are going to church. And I think that may change the dynamic he describes. I also think that just the world is getting weirder generally in an important way. Like maybe, there's some 1970s elements about it, like people are interested in UFOs again. All of this stuff with AI has weird, slightly supernaturalist overtones. And I just think younger elites, like whoever they are, but like, Harvard, Yale, whatever group you want, I think they're going to have maybe not a Christian view on the world, probably not necessarily, but certainly a weirder and more open-minded view of what's happening in reality than people did 30 years ago.
So the strict materialism of the past, you think is waning?
I mean, look, everybody's biased by who they talk to, right? So anyone who has me on their podcast to talk about this book probably is maybe more open-minded than average about religion. But what I have found in talking with people who are journalists, intellectuals who are non-believers is I get very few people making the really hard materialist pitch and saying, come on, Ross, we know the universe is just whirling atoms and it's all an accident. I get a lot more people who are willing to say, hey, I think you're probably right. There is something more complex and weirder going on. Maybe there is some kind of higher purpose. I'm not going to call it God. I can't get there on like literal miracles, like healing miracles. No, I can't get there. Yeah. But I think a lot of even elites are, they're willing to say that kind of the reductive materialist portrait of reality is missing something big, which I think it obviously is.
If you think these conversations are valuable, would you do us a favor and please like this video and subscribe to this channel? When you do that, you help us get these conversations out to a wider audience by telling YouTube that people are interested in this. Also, you can go to SocratesInTheCity.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you can check back every week. There's new stuff here every week. Thank you for tuning in.